Hi witches! So today we are going to do a relatively quick run through of some death deities. So of course October is our month. I'm talking all about like death in the spirit world and anything spooky / associated with Samhain. So I want to go over some gods that you might want to venerate or maybe start working with on Samhain, considering that a lot of these deities are associated with it. So again, this is going to be a brief overview of these gods. This is not their entire history or mythology because that would take hours and hours that I do not have for me to like make a video about. If you are interested in like learning about more of them, I do recommend just doing your research, finding a book, going to the library, you know, supporting our public libraries and keeping everything free, and you know, just like seeking that knowledge. I hope this is meant to be just kind of like a diving off point. So again, I'm not going to go super in depth on everything. I do have a lot of gods to talk about and I am very excited. Societies have some god or goddess figure that is associated with death. It is something that as human beings, we all experience in one way or another, whether or not we are living or are the ones doing the passing. It's a really universal concept, and it totally makes sense that every single society has some sort of like death deity or god or multiple in a pantheon. So again, if this is something that you are interested in and you work with a specific pantheon that I did not mention, that is a-okay. I would love to hear more about it actually. I just didn't have time in this video, so I tried to touch on the ones that we hear about a lot, like in modern witchcraft and paganism, that are from specifically open practices, so that way people are a little bit more, I don't know, I guess free to learn more, or maybe feel a little bit more comfortable learning about them and venerating them. So I hope that makes sense. Anyways, the first god we're going to talk about is one of my own deities. It is Anubis. I know, very fitting, and yes, of course I had to put him first. So he is the Egyptian god of death. You might see it also as Anpu or Anupu, which is the actual Egyptian way of saying it. Anubis is the Greek like version of his name. He's the god of death and mummification, embalming the afterlife. He's also a guardian of cemeteries and tombs, so that's why I go to the cemetery to work with him. And he's usually depicted as a canine or a man with a canine head. I work with him. He's really great. He's very calm and very kind of stoic, which I do appreciate. He's also really funny though. Like he's just and I just really like working with him a lot, and he's helped me calm down a lot about the concept of death. So if that is something that you are stressed out about, Anubis is your guy. The next god I want to talk about also comes from ancient Egypt, and that is Osiris. If you were on my Patreon, I did a full write-up about Osiris. If you are interested in learning more about him, check it out. Also, my Patreon is still up and running. It starts at $1 a month. You get content like basically every day. And it's gonna be even more so. I'm gonna start offering classes through there. So if you are interested in it, definitely check it out. There's gonna be a couple changes coming soon, but it's all gonna be like much improved, and it's gonna be really, really awesome. I'm so excited to start working on it. So anyways, I do have a whole write-up about Osiris on there if you're interested in learning more. But basically, Osiris is the god of fertility, agriculture, the afterlife, death, and resurrection, because those are all integral to his origin story. He was basically a pharaoh who was killed and then brought back to life, and then he kind of descended into the underworld basically. So what does that sound like? Anyways, he became the king of the underworld and is very closely associated with death. Before that, Anubis was like the death god. But because the Egyptian civilization lasted for like thousands of years, of course there's going to be changing mythology. So in the later part of the Egyptian like kingdom, I guess, or empire, Osiris really became that like figurehead of like the underworld and death, whereas Anubis became more towards like embalming and the processes that us people go through, our physical bodies go through in order to go into the afterlife. Does that make sense? I hope that makes sense. Moving right along, we go to Mesopotamia and have Eresh-ki-gal, and I am so sorry if I mispronounced that, but I tried. I looked at a lot of like different pronunciation guides, and that's the closest I could get. So Eresh-ki-gal is the goddess of Kor, which is the Mesopotamian afterlife or underworld. She is also referred to as the Lady of the Great Earth, so she's kind of an earth-based deity, as well as she's also called Irkalla, which is their name for the underworld as well. So it's kind of like how Hades is Hades, but also Hades is like the underworld. Does that make sense? There's a lot of like translations or like words like the same word meaning different things, or a person, like, oh, she's like a personification. It's a whole thing. So if you are more interested in learning about her, definitely check it out, or definitely do some research. It's a very, Mesopotamia is like very ancient and like kind of intimidates me. So I'm like, ooh, but she's a very interesting goddess. I was excited to do, to learn about her. The husband of Ereshkigal is named Nergal, and is one of the most widely venerated Mesopotamian gods like ever. And he is closely related to war, disease, and the underworld. So whereas she's kind of like that, like the womb, or that chthonic goddess or whatever, I think that's how you say that word. She's more, or he's more of like the god of like inflicted death. So she's more like natural death, like the natural cycles of the earth and life that we see in the seasons changing, whereas he's more like war and sickness and stuff like that. So they both ruled over the underworld. They just kind of had different aspects of it. Does that make sense? I think it's cool to see how these two gods, or two deities, I should say, evolved, because, you know, those are two very different deaths. Like we have like the violent, unpleasant death, and then we have just kind of the natural, you know, cycles of life. So I think those are two very interesting personifications. It's cool as a modern witch to be able to look at that and like understand like why they had two different deities, or that culture had two different deities for the same concept, basically. So moving right along, we're going a little bit further north to Ireland, and we are talking about my matron, the Morrigan. So the Morrigan is mainly associated with war and fate, especially with foretelling like prophecies and doom, and death or victory in a battle. So she's not specifically a death goddess. A lot of people think she is, but she's really more of like a war goddess and like a prophetess. That's how I kind of see her. But she does like have a lot of associations with death. One of her animals is the crow. That's like the main one, like the crow or the raven. So she is definitely associated with it, but I find that to call her a death goddess in the same way you call Anubis, who is like the god of death or whatever, I think that it's a little bit of a misnomer. It might just be me and the way I see her as an aspect, but I see her more as like a war goddess. So there's that, but she is associated with death on the battlefield. So take that what you will. I do see her venerated a lot at Samhain. I venerate her at Samhain, and I do associate her with death. It's just more, I see her more as a war goddess. Does that make sense? I've explained myself, I think, too much, but yes, the Morrigan. So the next goddess that I wanted to talk about today is Freya, and I'm trying again with the pronunciation. I've been corrected by Norse pagans, and I'm really sorry, but my mouth just doesn't do that, so I'm sorry. But she's associated with, of course, beauty, fertility, sex, war, gold, and sailor, which is kind of like the witchier arts, or like the communion between, you know, someone and a god, or the gods, I should say. But she also, the reason she's associated with death, and the reason we're talking about that today, is because she decides, like on a battlefield, Freya gets the first pick of anyone who dies, and she takes them into her hall. Then Odin decides who goes to Valhalla. So, she's associated with that aspect of death. It's kind of similar to the Morrigan in my mind, but it's a little bit different. And of course, that is not her only association. She has other ones, but I did want to mention her because of that, where she gets to pick the souls who fall in battle first. Like that's like a very big honor, because Odin, being the Allfather, you know, he's all powerful. So for him to be like, oh, you know, you can pick first. Like, I think that says a lot of what he thinks of her. So, Norse pagans, again, correct me if I'm wrong. I have not studied Norse mythology like super hard, but that's like the vibe I got. So yeah. Another Norse goddess that I wanted to talk about was Hel. So it is not Kate Blanchett's like Hela, like that's not really it. She's actually much more quiet. So I see her as like a true like death god. Like if I pick up on the vibe, if I'm picking up on the vibe, right? So she was appointed by the god Odin to rule over Hel, just spelled H-E-L, not H-E-L-L, which again is like her name and also the realm, the name of the realm that she rules. So it's a little bit confusing. Similar to Ereshkigal being called Irkalla. In the Prose Edda, it is said that Hel rules over these vast like estates in the underworld. She is like half living and half dead, which is very cool like image, I guess, of a goddess. And I believe that she's more kind of like on the, she's not like vengeful. She gives me a quiet vibe, where she's just kind of like Hades, where she, you know, sees to her lands in the underworld. She also plays a big part in the attempted resurrection of the god Balder, but that is a whole other story for another day. If you are into Norse mythology or haven't learned about it yet, definitely check out the Poetic and Prose Eddas. Those are like first-hand sources, I believe, or like translated sources that detail some of the mythology of the Norse mythology. The next god I want to talk about, as I am slowly losing light, sorry guys. The next god I want to talk about is Odin, and he is of course the Allfather, the king of the gods. He's associated with wisdom, with death, he's associated with the gallows, with war, battle, victory, as well as magic. So he definitely has those ties as well. So he picks, like I said, he picks warriors who die on the battlefield to come with him to Valhalla. So Odin is a very, very complex god, and for those who work with him, it's very, I see a lot of change when they start working with him and then as they continue on with their practice. It's really amazing. So he's a very interesting god to me. I just don't work with, again, the Norse pantheon. It's never called to me. So yeah, moving right along into the ancient Greek religion, we are going to talk about the man I've talked about a bunch, Hades. So he is the god of death, god of the dead, I should say, and the king of the underworld. He was the eldest son of Kronos and Rhea, but he was the last son who came out of Kronos when Zeus fought him. So between him and his brothers, Zeus got the sky, Poseidon got the sea, and Hades got the underworld. So he's one of the gods who does not reside on Olympus. He kidnapped Persephone, and that is a whole thing that I can talk about. There's a very complex myth, and it is actually one of the most widely known myths or legends or stories, I should say, that was, you know, I guess not myth, but it's something that was a central focus of a lot of Greek life, especially around the time of the harvest when Persephone went into the underworld. So yes, Hades is another death god. I see him more as being, like I said, kind of a stoic figure versus a like war figure. So yeah, Hades. Moving right along, another goddess of mine. I worship a lot of gods who are associated with death, oh my gosh. And that is Hecate. Hecate is the goddess in ancient Greek religion and mythology who is associated with death, witchcraft, the crossroads, entranceways, night, magic, necromancy, ghosts, stuff like that. So she's really invoked more when it comes to spirit work versus being like a goddess of death, but she is associated with death. She's a goddess who can go freely to and from the underworld. She is called a psychopomp, and so is the next god that I'm about to talk about. And so yeah, she does have that association with ghosts, and she actually went to go look for Persephone when Persephone went missing. So yeah, moving right along, we have Hermes, who is an Olympian deity. So he lives on Mount Olympus. Hecate and Hades do not. He is kind of what is known as, like I said, a psychopomp or a soul guide. So any gods that are associated with ferrying souls into the underworld, it's cool. They kind of fall into their own category of being a psychopomp. So they're very interesting. He's kind of seen more as a messenger god, but because he does ferry souls to the underworld, I wanted to mention him because he can be venerated around this time, and I think people should. Of course, mentioning Hades, I do have to talk about Persephone. So Persephone is the daughter of Zeus and Demeter. She is the queen of the underworld. She is very associated with the harvest season and also with the spring. So she's kind of seen as the personification of spring returning to the land. But right now is like the time where she is seen to be going into the underworld, and Demeter's grief is so great that our land loses its fertility and the plants begin to die. So now it's time to harvest what we sowed or sown in the spring. So she does live part of the year in the underworld and part of the year up here, like up on Earth, you know, spring and summertime versus fall and winter time. So she's kind of seen as that personification of the changing of the seasons, I guess, or she's like associated with it at least. And right now is a time that a lot of people who do venerate her kind of say goodbye for a little bit, and it's a little sad. But she, you know, there's always the promise that she returns with the spring. So I think that's really beautiful. The final Greek god I wanted to talk about is actually a minor Greek god, and that is Thanatos, and he is the Greek personification of death. In Greek mythology, he's referred to a lot as like a concept, but not really like, as Thanatos said. It's similar to like Nyx or Gaia or Erebus or anything like that, where it's more of a personification of something greater in the world or a greater concept. So Thanatos is the personification of death. I kind of see him like the angel of death or like the Grim Reaper, but it's different. It's like it's very difficult to explain, but Thanatos, yes. So yes, these are some death deities, death spirits. These are not all of them by any means. It's just some that I wanted to touch on a little bit today. If you work with any death gods or death deities that I did not mention here today, definitely leave it down below. I would love to hear more about your practice. And if you want to learn more about gods, definitely check out my Patreon. Again, like it's super cool. It's about to be popping. And yeah, I'll see you guys tomorrow.